Hey, friend, at the time of this recording, it is 2026. The new year has just started. And if you're a worship leader or a pastor in the worship department, you know that this is the time when you start to think about this upcoming year. And all of us would agree that development on our worship team is so important. Like, we have to develop not just people, but also positions and what do we want to accomplish this year. But unfortunately, development tends to be one of those things that while we all agree it's super important, the actual implementation of it and actually developing a plan for it is just something that just falls by the wayside. And so this episode is dedicated to you, worship leader of a big church, of a small church that is thinking about development this year. And I want to suggest a new way to think about development for your worship team for 2026 or whenever you are watching this episode here. And so this is episode 14 of the KF Music Studio podcast. My name is Kevin, owner of KF Music Studio, and I am so glad that you're here with us in our new studio space here. We're launching a brand new season here, season 2, really season 3, but we're going to be turning out some more episodes here, and I'm so excited that you're here with me today to talk about something that I think is really important, and that is development on a church worship team. And I've been a youth pastor, a worship pastor at several different churches, multi-site churches, small churches. I've done this for over 20 years. And so I've seen the good, the bad, and I've seen the rest. And so I want to offer a new way to think about it for you so that you can enter 2026 with development on your mind and that you have a plan for developing your team the way that you want them to be as we close this year 12 months from now. And so before we talk about a specific plan for developing our church worship team, I want to just establish a few truths here that are applicable to every church, because I know, as somebody who was in full-time ministry for years, I know that your first inclination when you see a podcast episode like this is you're like, well, yeah, that's great, but that won't happen here, or we can't do this here. We don't have the money or the resources, or the culture isn't just one of development. And so what I want you to think about, I have a couple of truths that I believe are true for every single church, every ministry gathering, every ministry in your church. Like, I think these are universal truths that it doesn't matter the size. I think we have to understand that these are real truths, and we have to develop them. We have to work them into our system. And so I want you to turn off that part of your brain that's like, that feels guilt or shame or feels disappointed, or just, we get defensive sometimes if things hit too close to home. Can I ask you to lay that aside? Because today, what I believe God wants to speak through me to you is that development is for everybody, and you can do it well, no matter the budget, no matter the resources. And so here's a couple of truths, is that every church must have a plan for development on their worship team. To me, that is non-negotiable. That is essential. You have got to have a plan for how you're going to develop, train up, recruit your worship team. Like, you've got to have a plan for it. And I'm not just talking about throwing a bunch of money at it, because money doesn't solve problems, right? Money can be a band-aid on problems, but the problem is still there. And so we want to dig to the root of how we think about development, and we want to come up with some good ideas of how we can develop a plan for your team. And that's what this episode is here for. But the reality is, every church has to have a plan for development. I think that every church, or most churches, I would say, more often than not, most churches are 1 to 3 team member transitions away from having a real volunteer situation. And what I mean by that is, most churches, if you're a typical church, you have a church worship team, and you have sort of your core people that tend to serve every week. But you're really only 1 to 3 transitions away from that completely going off the rails. And your volunteer team that was once secure, now you're in a situation where you're trying to find people, and now you're trying to fill in gaps, and you're trying to fill holes that you may not have even thought about like a month ago. And if that's you, I'm believing the best for you this year. This episode, I hope, will give you a lot of value and how we can overcome that, right? But I think that most churches uh, are one family transition away, or one just season of life away, one or two volunteers, key volunteers, transition to a different ministry or take a different assignment. And now we're in a situation. And I think that's a truth. I think most churches are like that. And I think the other truth that I want us to wrestle to the ground is that we have to have a plan for recruiting and onboarding team members to your church, and have a system in place to use and develop them, right? Recruitment and development are equally as important to each other. And so everything we're talking about with development, I'm going to be intertwining recruitment in there as well, because if you're a regular worship leader, just like I was a regular worship leader, to me those were the two most important things I had to focus on. Was I need more people, and I need to recruit them, and I need to recruit high quality musicians and high character people for our teams. But also I need to develop them, and maybe I have some teens who are playing in the Wednesday night service that I want to get them in on Sunday. Recruitment and development are two sides, but they're very equally as important to each other. And I think you've got to have a plan for both. All right. So let me give you kind of 6 thoughts I have on development. And then at the end of this episode, I'm going to give you a couple of action steps that you can take, some questions to ask, that you can start 2026 or whenever you're watching this. You can start the year strong and really develop a good plan for development. And the first thought I have for you is you just have to commit to developing, right? Like, development doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen by mistake. It doesn't happen on accident. It is an intentional decision. It's you saying, as the worship leader or as the pastor overseeing it, or the executive pastor, or even the senior pastor, if you're in a kind of a bivocational thing where you are the lead pastor but also you're in charge of worship, like we all have to commit to development. Like, that's where it starts, because if you can't commit to development, it will not happen, right? Like, it seems so simple that if you're watching this, you might say, well, yeah, obviously we have to commit to it to have it happen. But man, ministry life is so busy, and ministry life is so many things are competing for our attention, that the first thing that falls off of our calendar, the first thing that falls off of our mind, is development and long-term planning. And so I think that a good first step for most of you watching this is just to say 2026, this year, is the year we commit to development, right? I think that development is what you get out of it is what you put into it. And so if you don't put any resources or any time or any energy into developing your team or to recruiting good team members, like if you don't put any time into that, then why are we surprised that we don't have the result that we want, that we're not developing our team? And so I want you to think about, we're going to commit time this year to development. We're going to commit talent, and we're going to commit treasure, the old 3 T's. We're going to commit time, we're going to commit energy, effort, and then we're going to commit our money and resources to development. And if we do those things, everything else that I'm going to lay out for you is going to fall into place. But if we don't get that first thing in mind, if we don't commit to having a culture of developing on our church's worship team, it's not going to happen. It just won't happen, and it won't happen the way that you want it to. So I want us to enter this year strong, and the best way to do that is to have a great plan for development. All right. The second thought I have for you is development takes time, and recruitment takes time, both on the micro level, individually, person to person, But then on a macro level, on a church wide level, it just takes time. Okay. So I don't want you to hear this episode and say, that sounds great. We'll try it for a week. Oh, we didn't see any results. And so we're just going to abandon it. It must not work. We know this in every other area of life, but it always bears repeating that anything worth doing well, anything that brings glory to God is something that we have to work on and we have to commit to it. And we have to decide that it's important to us and we just have to be willing to give it time, right? Like this is not a quick fix 30 days to your worship team to having as many volunteers as you could have and all of those things. That's just not reality, right? Good development takes time. And I want to help walk alongside you here and give you some tips on how to think about that. But you have to commit to this really for the next 6 to 12 months. Like we're talking a year-long phase here. That's how long development takes, right? To get something started up from zero, it's going to take a long time, but the rewards for it and the fruits that you're going to see from it, from developing your team and having a great culture in that way, man, they are so worth it. And so I just want you to know development takes time. Okay. The third thought I have for you is development is not just musician development, like practical development, skill based development on their instruments or vocally or on harmonies or any of that. Development is not just that. Development is spiritual development. And I think often we tend to go too far on either end. We tend to develop a lot spiritually, but we don't always develop as much practically, and vice versa. We develop so much practically, we forget the spiritual aspect of it. But the reality is, like, you have to do both. I think you have to develop both physically, like your practical gifts, and your spiritual gifts. You have to have them both. I don't think you can go one or the other, or I definitely don't think you can go one without the other. Now, if you and I were putting together a band to go play at a local restaurant on a Friday night, you wouldn't need that spiritual aspect of it because you could just practically train up some musicians, train up some vocalists, and you could show up, you could do the gig. There are some things that I think are inherently spiritual, like being disciplined enough to show up on time, dressed appropriately, have good conduct, to like be a good person, a good hang, be good at your instrument. Like those things are all super important. Nobody would say that they're not important, but they also, in a worship sense, there's also a spiritual aspect of what we are doing. And I would argue that it's almost more important to develop your team spiritually than it is to develop them practically. And so we're going to talk about some ideas down the road, down the line here on this episode of how we can practically develop our team spiritually. But I want you to just remember that development is not just practical skills on their instrument or on their voice, it's also spiritual development. Number 4, my thoughts I have for you on development. Development has to be a commitment from the top down. Okay. So many of you are like I was when I was a worship pastor, that I was not the top of the food chain. I was not the lead pastor or the senior pastor or the overseers. I wasn't that. I was a worship pastor. My job was to oversee all elements of worship. And nothing that I lay out for you will be as effective as a 15 to 30-minute conversation with you and your senior leadership, where you lay out some of the questions I'm going to ask you and where you tell them, hey, we need to commit to development, and here's why it's important. Here's why it matters. Because if you don't have commitment from the top, you're always going to be fighting with them. And that was something I saw a lot when I taught in the schools, when I was a music educator in the schools. Like I would see teachers always complain, or music teachers always complaining about their principals or their admin. And I always told them, yes, the people in our administration, the people above us, they have things that they have to worry about that we don't have to worry about. And so it's our job to bring them into our world, our struggles, our frustrations, and have a plan for how we want to ease those tensions, right? Now, you're going to hear that and you're going to say, yeah, but my senior leader is this and he doesn't, she doesn't, they don't do this, they don't care about this. And I would say, yes, there are situations that is the case. That if you go through all these steps and you lay out a plan with your senior leaders and say, hey, this is where I think we need to go, and we need to put some time into this. And if they say no, you can't you can't do anything about that. You have to figure out a way to maybe do things a little bit cheaper. Or I'm certainly not advocating for you to burn yourself out. Please don't burn out, because ministry is a long journey, right? And so but I do think it is our job to communicate up and to say, here's where we're at, here's our pain points, and here's what I think would really help us alleviate that. And you give I always thought when I was a worship pastor or a music teacher that it's my job to advocate for to my admin, to my senior leadership, and they ultimately don't care as much about my department as I do. And they shouldn't, right? They're overseeing the whole thing. They're overseeing multiple departments, or in some cases, a whole church, right? They can't care as much about who's going to play acoustic guitar next week. That's what you're there for. That's what your job is. And our job is to advocate strongly to our senior leadership, to our teams, to our bosses, and say, hey, this is where we're at, and this is where I think we need to go. And we've got to do that in a tone that's not super complainy or with a bad attitude. You've got to go in with facts. You got to go in with a plan, with a decent attitude of how you can serve the overall mission of the church. And that will help you get further along on the plans that you want to do if you're able to do that. The fifth truth I see is that I believe that all musicians want to be developed. Whether you've been playing on your instrument for a year or two, or you've been playing for decades, all musicians want to be developed, right? I think there's a certain misnomer that you sort of play for a couple of years, you learn all you can learn, and then that's just what you play the rest of your life. And yes, there are examples of people who have done that and they love it, and maybe that's their level. But I do think whether it's physically, like practically on their instrument, or spiritual development, every musician wants to be developed. And so if you're thinking right now, as you're thinking through your worship team, if you're hearing this episode and you say, yeah, I think most people do, but I've got this guitar player or this violin player or, this flute player or this drummer, and they're just set in their ways. They're just going to do what they do, and they don't really have any interest in development. Can I tell you, they do, if they can see the fruit of it and if they can see how it will help them and benefit them. And by the way, that's like not necessarily practical, like we're talking spiritual development here. Like, who doesn't want to be spiritually developed in a way that they want their pastor to pray for them, or to encourage them, or to challenge them, or to bring the biblical truths found in Scripture and help them be a better person first and then a better musician? Like, I think everybody wants that. And I think if you're sitting here listening to this and you say, well, but not my church. I don't think my people want to do that. Can I tell you, I think you're missing it, right? Your mindset is so important. I want to challenge you to change your mindset and say they do want to be developed, and it's my role to try to find ways to develop them. And the last thought I have on development is I think that any culture, any worship team culture, any musician culture, any culture on any team, any business, anything like that is only 6 months away from change. So if you stepped into a situation, as I have several times in my life, where I stepped into a worship culture that was not what I was told it was, that was actually a little bit more fractured than I was sold when I came in, or had some relationships that had frayed over the years, or some miscommunications or some frustrations that boiled over. Every church culture, every team culture, I believe, is 6 months away from change. And so if you're looking at it now and you say, man, I don't know how we're going to get here, or how we're going to get out of this. Like, man, some of my people just have really bad attitudes, or they're resistant to my leadership or my change. Can I tell you, you're 6 months away from affecting real change that will make a difference. And so, again, it all comes back to our mindset, right? So if we beat ourselves up over it and just say it'll never change, it'll never, like, we got to get that out of here. Like, let's leave that back in 2025. 2026 is the year we say no, no, no. I'm going to take ownership of the things I can take ownership of, and I'm not going to focus on the results. I'm going to focus on the input. I want my team culture to be healthier in July than it is today, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to give you some tips of how to help with that. But don't feel like you're a prisoner or you're held hostage to your team culture, because you're not. Like, you're the leader, and part of leading is you get to lead. You get to set the course. You get to set the direction. Which way are we going? What's important to us as a team? What's not important to us as a team? What was important in the last season but isn't important now? These are all the questions that you get to ask and you get to answer as the worship leader. Okay, so those are my truths on development. So now I want to talk about some practical steps, right? So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I'm in, I'm committing to development in 2026. What do I need to do? And so I have a list of some practical steps here, and these will be, I'll put these in the show notes. And if you, this would be a great time to take out your notes app, or to jot down some notes if you're a notepad person. I'm an iPad person, as you can see with these notes, and this would be a great part of the episode to write down these steps. And I want you to really go through the work of asking these questions, so that development in 2026 is something you can be proud of, and that happens intentionally, not something that happens by accident. All right. So here's my practical steps. If I was a full-time worship leader right now, this is what I would do day one. And it does not matter the church, does not matter how long I've been there, doesn't matter at all. These are the questions I would ask, and I would ask every year in January when I was in full-time ministry. And here's how it goes. So step one, I would have a meeting with whomever is a stakeholder in the worship department. So if I'm a worship leader and I have, let's say, a coordinator underneath me, or I have a few interns, or if I have an executive pastor that I work closely with, or if it's just me, either way, I would have a meeting. And the whole purpose of the meeting is just to assess where we currently at right now. Like, if you can't name it, you can't fix it. And so I want to encourage you to have that first meeting. And I generally am not a big meetings person, because a lot of them, frankly, just kind of waste time. And I think we're not as efficient. But this is one I think is really important, because you have to assess, like, where are we actually at? Like, what's going well on our worship team? What are we proud of? What's not going well? Where are there holes in our team? And what I used to do is I would take a whiteboard and I would literally list down every instrument that I wanted on the worship platform. And so I would say drums, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, bass, keys, voice, if you have any supplemental instruments. I would make a list at the beginning of every year, and I would write down everybody who served that year as a potential person. And so you're basically making like a roster of possibilities. So you're assessing who did I have play bass this year? And notice how I said that it's who I did have play, not who's like a part of the church. Because I think you want to just have an accurate, like, how did we get through 52 worship services last year? Like, how did we do it? Were there Sundays that we were missing some people? Like, all of those things, I would just put them all on the whiteboard, right? And go through each instrument and say, okay, go through Planning Center, go through whatever software you use, and just write down everybody who served on those. And I'm sure there is a way to pull a report like that on Planning Center. That's not the purpose of this conversation, but I'm sure that there are ways to do that. But 30 minutes worth of work going onto the matrix view and just looking, making sure that you documented everybody who served on everything this year. And what you find out is I would look at that list and say, okay, what team members are fully bought into the church? They are members of our church, they're members of our community, and what can they play? I'm fortunate enough to have played a bunch of things in my worship time. I was a good acoustic guitar and bass guitar are my two main, but I've played drums and I played keys and played electric guitar. Usually, if I'm playing those, I'm kind of filling in for gaps, and I'm fine. I always say I'm like the Toyota Camry of playing those instruments. Like it'll get you there. It'll get you there safely. It won't be the prettiest, but we'll get you there, right? And so sometimes I've been kind of typecast where people only see me as a bass player, that they don't even know I can play keys or I can play guitar. And so those are little notes I would make. If I know that information, if they only played electric this year, I would also include them. Hey, that person can also play bass. And so I want to include them in the bass category. The purpose being you have to assess exactly where you are at, not where you want to be. We're going to get to that in the next step, but you have to assess where you actually at with your volunteer team. And where are they at? Are they, members who can serve every week? Are they members who maybe need a week to practice the music? Like, is there a skill gap that we need to address that we can partner with them to help them get there? Like, all of those things, you have to assess all of those things. And so if you take nothing else from this podcast episode, I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of churches just don't do. That if we did it, if we took the time and we went through that process of honestly saying, who are all of our worship team members and what can they play? What have they played? And where are we at? Where do we have the most holes? What was our biggest pain point from a volunteer standpoint? If you just did that, you would notice a lot of holes that maybe you didn't notice before, or holes that you maybe covered up that are actual situations or gaps that you need to fill, right? So that's the first step. Assess where you're at. The second step is I want you to decide then what is the ideal rotation for you and your church's worship team. And I don't want you to just think about Sundays too. I want you to think about if you're overseeing, I used to oversee our students' worship as well, and our kids' worship. So 3 separate environments. So you want to do this as one overarching worship ministry umbrella, but then you want to break it down to each department. I want you to decide, like, what's the ideal rotation? Like, what's the best way to make sure that we are as healthy as we want to be and as healthy as we can be? And I think part of that, I'm a firm believer that we have to give people weeks off. We have to give them weeks off before they ask for it. Because I've had several volunteers like this over the years, and I'm like this, if I'm honest. Like, I love serving in the church. I love doing it every week, but man, occasionally I need a Sunday off. Or if I have a family, like I need to be at service with my family. And so you need to decide for your leadership, with your senior leadership, deciding like what's our ideal rotation. Now, if you were to ask me, like, what's my ideal rotation? I'm a big fan of at least once every 6 to 8 weeks. I want to try to give somebody a Sunday off and give it to them before they ask for it. But I think that that's a great rhythm to get into. I've been at churches where they did once a month. They said one Sunday you need to be in church with your family. I like that too. I think that's good too. But that's a question that you have to wrestle to the ground is, what's the ideal rotation for me? And for me, it was usually once every 6 to 8 weeks. For me, I really liked looking at my calendar year and saying, okay, I have, these 5 or 6 A+ volunteers that love to do it, will do anything you ask them to do. Man, I love them so much. I love them enough that I want to give them a week off to be with their family and to experience church from a different way, right? Because if we're always serving in the church, we can kind of lose sight of what it means to walk into a service, to sit in a service, to be on the other side of a worship set. Like, these things matter. And so I want you to decide what's your ideal rotation for your church worship team. And what's your ideal worship department setup? Like, what instruments do you want? What is your ideal worship set? How many vocalists do you have? How many song leaders do you have? What are the other people doing? Do you have a choir? Do you want a choir? Do you want 6, 8, 10 people up on a little platform to kind of add some energy to the worship set, right? So think about your instruments and think about your rotation. Think about your staffing. Think about all those things. And in this step 2, we are trying to identify what's our ideal setup. Step 1, we assessed what our setup was, where we're at currently. Step 2 is we're going to figure out what's our ideal setup. And then that leads us to step 3, is you have to assess the gap, right? There will be a gap between what we have been doing and what we want to do, and we have to assess it. Why is there a gap? Is there a gap? When you look at it and you say, man, I really want to give my worship team members once every 5 or 6 weeks off, a Sunday off from serving. And then if you look and you have 5 volunteers that didn't get that time off, well, why? And what can we do? What can you and I do? What can you do to mine that gap and fix it moving forward, right? And so in this is always a great time, beginning of the year too, to assess how many worship volunteers did I onboard last year. So last 12 months, how many worship volunteers was I able to onboard fully onto my worship team, right? Or even in the last 90 days, how many worship volunteers have I been able to onboard, right? Because again, that's part of your gap. If you look at it and you say, man, I really want 2 electric guitars every Sunday, but half the Sundays I only had 1 electric guitar, and a couple of Sundays I had 0. Well, there's a gap there, right? You want 2, you had less than that. And so think about, there's a gap. How do I fix it? How do I recruit? How do I recruit those instrumentalists? Or even better, is there somebody currently serving on my worship team that actually plays guitar or plays bass or plays keys that maybe I just haven't asked them, or they just never brought it up because, I just have never asked them? Or how many people would be willing to learn because they love music and they just want to learn another instrument? Is there anybody like that on your worship team that would maybe jump into some lessons or jump into some courses if you were able to provide them? And I think that's an important gap to mind, that I want you to think about. I have a gap between my ideal and what actually happened. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to recruit or train up or develop new musicians? And I already know, even as I say that, because I've worked in smaller churches where a younger me would have said, yeah, there's a gap and there's just no musicians. We've tapped everybody, and we've asked everybody, and this is what we have. We need new people to jump into the church. The old meme of when a guitar player comes into your church for the first time and the worship pastor is like, I got to take you out to coffee right away. Things like that, right? Like, musicians may, and sometimes do, they come into your church and you sort of, I believe that God kind of put them there for that season. But I also think we're missing a key part, that there are people that, if we had a plan for development, 6 months from now could be some of our best volunteers that would actually love that and would feel empowered if their church paid for them to get guitar lessons for 6 months. Like, I believe that people would do that. And I know that because every church I've been at, that's a question that I bring up a lot. And that's something I hear, is they want to be developed. And so maybe that's a resource you haven't quite thought about yet, but is there. All right. So we assessed where we're at. We came up with our ideal. You can also flip those. Just thinking about it now, you could flip it. What's your ideal? What actually happened? I kind of like to do it the other way, but either way would be fine. You could do them either step. You assess that gap, and now the fun part is you make a plan. So you say, okay, what's my plan for recruitment? And what's my plan for development? And so I want to give you some ideas, just some things that I've used that have worked as far as onboarding new people to our worship teams and developing people also. Like, so a new way to think about that. And my first question for you, if you were to say, what's my plan for recruitment, is how will people in the congregation know that there's a need? Do they know there's a need? How will they get connected to you? And what's the onboarding process look like? Is there an audition? Is there a handbook? Is there, maybe, are you hosting interest nights? Maybe team development nights? Maybe team development digital nights, which, by the way, doesn't always have to happen in person. You can do things digitally. You can host a workshop. You can host a Zoom. You can do those things, and people, were more likely to attend if they can fit it into their schedule. So I want you to think about those things. I want you to think about, like, honestly, like, where are we at with recruitment? Have we, if you're a church that plays slides before a service, is there a slide on there that says, here's how you get connected to the worship team? I told this story before, but there was a time about a decade ago, I transitioned out of a smaller church being a worship leader, and I went to a big multi-site church. And I was in that church for probably 6 months. I had been a worship leader. I had been on staff, but I was now in a bigger church. And I remember for 6 months saying, man, I really want to serve on the worship team. Like, I really want to do this. I went to school for music. I'm a music educator. Like, I think I can add some value to the church. And for 6 months, I never knew how to get connected. Now, you might say, well, obviously every week they said your next steps are go to the blue wall or go to the connect area or whatever. Yeah, but we have to make it so easy for people to know there's a need and to get connected that they really have no excuse. and like I said, I didn't have an excuse, but for 6 months I didn't get connected. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to. And what's funny about that is I remember it changed because in December they ran a pre-service slide that said, get connected to our worship team. And I did that immediately. And I just think, man, I missed out on 6 months. More importantly, the church missed out on 6 months of having me as a high quality volunteer just because they didn't make the need known and didn't make it super easy for people to get connected. So think about your onboarding process, think about your development, and say, how can I make it so easy for people to get involved? And the last practical step for you is I want you to make a plan for development. And maybe that's as simple as you bring in a private coach like myself at KF Music Studio. I love coming in and helping churches with development. And maybe that's offering to give private lessons to everybody on your team. And my business and your church, we agree on a certain dollar amount, and then we offer it for free for every member of your worship team. Or every teen that wants to play, every 14-year-old with a guitar. Like, we could train them up. I could give you and develop resources for you that you can give to them to help them be a fully functioning, amazing musician. And you could change their destiny, right? Most musicians that I know share a very similar story, which is kind of similar to my story of why we studied music, why we became a musician. And it's almost always because somebody at some point took a chance on us or developed us, or we got good and we were given an opportunity, and that changed our lives. and that set us on a course of being a musician our whole lives. And so I want you to think about that, like with your development. Maybe it's bringing somebody like me in. Man, I'd be honored to just have a conversation with you and see where you're at. And then let's discuss some arrangements and let's see if we can get some development going at your church, man. Or, maybe there's an online video course series that your church buys and everybody else has access to. Some of those materials I'm developing right now, and I would love to customize them for your church. Um, Maybe it's serving on other platforms. So when I was several times in my life, I've served in a dual role as worship leader and youth pastor. And one of the things I realized was there's a lot of overlap between those two, right? Like you're leading worship on Sundays and you're preaching on Wednesdays. Well, I would use my students' platform as a chance for people to get reps playing with an in-ear system and understanding our verbiage and some of the songs we were playing. And if you do that, like people get developed. And so I want you to think about your development plan as maybe it's not just they immediately jump into Sunday service. Maybe they jump into a Wednesday night service or a Saturday breakfast, or, maybe they're serving kids worship. If you're creative and you think about ways to give people development, it will come up. Like you'll find ways to get people connected. But I really want you to think about that. Your practical steps this year, 5 steps. I want you to assess where you're at, where are you coming from in 2025, figure out your ideal setup in 2026 moving forward. I want you to assess the gap. Why is there a gap? What can I and what can my church do to onboard more people to fill that gap? I want you to make a plan for recruitment. So is it going to be a little flyer insert in the bulletin? If you do bulletins, is it a QR code? Is it an email or a text that goes out to the church? Is it, whatever it is, I want you to make a plan for that, and I want you to stick to it. And then also make a plan for development. Bring me in as a coach. I would be honored to do that and to help develop your team, to help take your B or C players who just need more reps and need more training, send them to me because I can help them. I can help them get them platform ready. I probably have played about 10,000 services at this point. So I would be honored to help your church in that way. And that's how we think about development and recruitment this year on your church's worship team. So which one of these resonated with you? Which one do you feel like is the one action step you're going to do this year, that you're going to take this year to really make a difference in your church worship ministry? So this is Kevin from KF Music Studio. Thank you for another great episode. Thanks for sticking with us here. I hope that this has given you a lot of value. Please feel free to shoot me a message on any of our social medias at KF Music Studio, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, the whole deal. Shoot me a message and let me know which one really resonated with you. I do try to read and respond to every comment because I want to make materials that serve you well and serve the church well. Our motto around here is we are developing aspiring musicians in confidence and character. And I believe that if we really focus on development in 2026, we can accomplish that. So again, this is Kevin from KF Music Studio signing off. Make sure to share this episode with a friend, and I will be back very soon with another episode. May you be blessed today, and I'll see you next time.